Every time you gave a drop of blood, you gave them something else. This is your biology mapped and stored, sold before you ever knew it was taken. They were building the world's largest biological database. Your family's secrets, your descendants' futures, deep in the terms of service, language most people never read. It was always the database. Genetic data predicts disease before symptoms appear. Now joined by your DNA. CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, holds over 21 million profiles. In 2024, 23andMe collapsed. Bankruptcy, biological surveillance was never just about medicine, was now being used by insurgents. Your DNA is yours, not a corporation's. Biological surveillance did not end privacy. It challenged it, forever changing how we protect our most intimate data. A civilization deciding, for the first time, that its most intimate data deserves a guardian worthy of it. Every time you gave a drop of blood, you gave them something else. Something no firewall can protect. Something no password can hide. Your biology, sold before you ever knew it was taken. Over 40 million people sent their DNA to private companies. They thought they were finding their ancestors. They were building the world's largest biological database, and no one voted for it. A simple swab, a prepaid envelope, a $99 promise. But inside that tube, your entire genetic blueprint. Your disease risks, your family's secrets, your descendants' futures. All of it, traveling through the mail to strangers. Behind the ancestry apps, billion-dollar deals. Pharmaceutical giants, insurance corporations, government contractors. They paid millions for access to your DNA. This is not science fiction. This is the world that already exists. The surveillance state went biological, and most people still don't know it happened. For decades, your medical records lived in filing cabinets. Then they were digitized, networked, aggregated, sold to intermediaries you've never heard of. Your health history is now a commodity. Blood draws, biopsies, newborn heel pricks. Every medical sample is a data point in someone's database. Companies collect, store, and process your biological material, often without explicit informed consent. Deep in the terms of service, language most people never read, you agree to share your data with her partners and affiliates. Those partners include insurance companies, law enforcement, foreign investors. You clicked agree. Most people always do. The ancestry business became a trillion-dollar industry, built on a simple human desire to know where you come from. Venture capital poured in, valuations exploded. The product was never the test. It was always the database. Congress held hearings, questions were asked, answers were vague. The executives spoke about innovation and science. They said your data was safe. But safe means different things to different people. Indigenous communities were among the first to raise the alarm. Their genetic data, collected for medical research, ended up in commercial databases. Sold, shared, stripped of cultural context. Sovereignty doesn't end at land. It includes blood. Your dead relatives never consented, but their biology lives in you and in those databases. A grandmother's cancer history, a grandfather's rare genetic trait. Your family tree was mapped by corporations before you were born. Pharmaceutical companies use your genetic data to develop targeted drugs. That sounds like the miracle of modern medicine, but those drugs are sold back to you at extraordinary prices. Your biology subsidizes their profits. You pay twice. Genetic data predicts disease before symptoms appear. The biology was taken from the poor. The profits went to the wealthy. In 2023, 23andMe was hacked. Nearly 7 million user profiles were stolen. Genetic ancestry, health predispositions, family connections, all of it on a dark web marketplace within days. Genetic data, once breached, cannot be changed. You can reset a password. You cannot reset your DNA. The 23andMe breach was not the first. It won't be the last. And the companies holding your data often survive the breach. You live with the consequences. Most people haven't thought about any of this. They're living their lives, trusting the systems around them. But the systems have been quietly recording. The biological surveillance state was built in plain sight. Inside those servers, the most intimate data ever collected. Genetic, medical, biometric, behavioral. Cross-referenced, correlated, analyzed by algorithms. Every recruit, every veteran. A portrait of humanity more complete than any census ever imagined. Part 1 ends where it must, with the question. Not how this began, not what the data contains, but who controls it and what they intend to do with it. Because the answer to that question will define the century. The database grew by design. The consent never did. It freed innocent people, convicted the guilty. A cousin's DNA can put you at a crime scene you never visited. Nearly 7 million user profiles were stolen. Genetic ancestry, health predispositions, family connections. You can reset a password, you cannot reset your DNA. The 23andMe breach was not the first. It won't be the last. And the companies holding your data often survive the breach. You live with the consequences. The biological surveillance state was built in plain sight. Genetic, medical, biometric, behavioral. A portrait of humanity more complete than any census ever imagined. But who controls it? And what they intend to do with it? What gives law enforcement the right to search a private database? CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, holds over 21 million profiles. Privacy advocates filed legal challenges. And in some cases, the courts did not rule in their favor. Courts heard the cases. Some ruled in favor of families. You wear the surveillance device voluntarily. Several states were sued for keeping newborn blood samples without consent. Courts heard the cases. Some ruled in favor of families. Health data brokers emerged as an invisible industry, all of it available to anyone willing to pay. You wear the surveillance device voluntarily, on your wrist, in your ear, sewn into your shirt. Bioethicists issued warnings, academics published papers. Every baby born in the United States has blood drawn at birth. The newborn screening program collects biological samples, standard, necessary, life-saving. But in most states, those samples are stored indefinitely and used for research you were never told about. And in the meantime, the samples remained in storage. China built the world's largest genomics company, BGI. It collected DNA from millions around the world. US intelligence agencies issued warnings about foreign genomic collection. The concern, foreign nations building biological profiles of American citizens. Using commercial DNA tests, research agreements, medical partnerships. Your genetics as a national security asset or liability. Pharmaceutical companies license genetic databases to create precision medicine. Targeted drugs, personalized therapies, miraculous outcomes. But the people whose DNA powered those drugs couldn't afford them. All of it, traveling through the mail to strangers. And no one voted for it. They thought they were finding their ancestors. They paid millions for access to your DNA. Every time you gave a drop of blood, you gave them something else. The product was never the test, it was always the database. And most people still don't know what happened. Companies collect, store, and process your biological material, something no firewall can protect. The ancestry business became a trillion-dollar industry. Over 40 million people sent their DNA to private companies. Pharmaceutical giants, insurance corporations, government contractors. Venture capital poured into the industry. Valuations exploded overnight. The surveillance state went biological, but those drugs are sold back to you at extraordinary prices. Behind the ancestry apps, billion-dollar deals. It freed innocent people, convicted the guilty, into airports, border checkpoints, government systems. The infrastructure exists beneath your feet. Undersea cables, satellite links, fiber optic grids, all of it carrying biological data from clinics to corporations, labs to governments. The architecture of control is as physical as the asphalt on your street. Biobanks are the physical archives of the biological surveillance system. The UK Biobank alone holds genetic data from 500,000 volunteers. The US All of Us research program is building a database of 1 million Americans. Scale was always the goal. Scale was always the danger. Government programs recruited the public directly. Your data for the greater good of medical research. The stated mission: eliminate disease, advance science, save lives. But data given to science doesn't stay in science. Government biobanks licensed their data to private industry. The transaction was legal, the disclosure was minimal. You enrolled to advance science. The data advanced shareholder value. Genomics went public, literally. Biotech companies with databases as their core asset went to market. Investors bet on access to human biology as a growth sector. The data economy found its most intimate product, you. Academia built the tools, industry scaled them. Algorithms trained on millions of genomes can now predict disease with terrifying accuracy. They can infer race, intelligence, sexual orientation, mental illness. From a strand of DNA that you shed without knowing, you shed your DNA everywhere: hair follicles, skin cells, saliva on a coffee cup. This environmental DNA can be collected legally by anyone for any purpose without your knowledge. Smart cities are already deploying environmental DNA sensors in public spaces. monitoring disease outbreaks, detecting drug use, tracking migration patterns. The stated purpose is public health. The capability is total biological surveillance. Wastewater surveillance became normalized during COVID-19, tracking viral loads in city sewage, identifying outbreak hotspots. Useful, life-saving, but the infrastructure now exists, and it can identify far more than just pathogens. In the developing world, data extraction was often framed as humanitarian. Free medical clinics, vaccination campaigns, research partnerships. Communities received healthcare, researchers received genomes. The exchange was rarely equal. Africa holds the most genetically diverse human populations on Earth. That diversity is scientifically invaluable for disease research. But for decades, African genomic data left the continent. Published in Western journals, patented in Western countries, profited in Western boardrooms and global corporate offices. The world's most vulnerable people, refugees, are biometrically registered at the border. Fingerprints, iris scans, sometimes DNA. The data is stored by UNHCR, governments, and private contractors. Their bodies become proof of existence. Their biology becomes a file. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security expanded DNA collection from immigrants. All adults crossing the border detained, processed, sampled, added to the FBI's CODIS database. For the first time, civil immigration status linked to a criminal DNA database. Civil liberties organizations sued, some courts pushed back, but the databases had already grown. Over 800,000 immigrant DNA profiles added to CODIS. Not criminals, people who crossed a line drawn in the desert. India built Aadhaar, the world's largest biometric database. Over 1.3 billion citizens enrolled. Fingerprints, iris scans, linked to bank accounts, healthcare, welfare. The stated purpose? Eliminate corruption, streamline government services. The actual result, a single point of failure for 1 billion lives. Aadhaar was breached within years of its launch, over 1 billion biometric records potentially exposed. Journalists who reported on the breach were prosecuted. The database continued to grow regardless. China's surveillance state combines facial recognition, biometrics, and DNA profiling at scale. Citizens are continuously monitored across urban and rural environments. The technology developed in Xinjiang was exported globally. 63 countries purchased Chinese surveillance systems. Hikvision, Dahua, Huawei, Chinese technology companies embedded in security systems across 6 continents. The cameras in your city's traffic system may process your face. The data may go places you've never considered. Europe attempted a defense, GDPR, the AI Act, genetic data protections, the strongest privacy regulations in the world. But regulators move on a legislative timeline. Technology moves on a startup timeline. The gap never closes. In San Francisco, startups competed to accumulate more genetic data. Their pitch decks led with database size. The more genomes you controlled, the more valuable you were to investors. Human biology became a venture-fundable asset class. GlaxoSmithKline paid $300 million for access to 23andMe's database. It was one of the largest genomic licensing deals in history. 5 million customers, their DNA, their health reports, their family connections, sold to a pharmaceutical company in a single signature. In 2024, 23andMe collapsed. Bankruptcy, massive layoffs. The question became, what happens to 15 million people's DNA data? Acquired by a pharmaceutical company or potentially sold to the highest bidder? Your most intimate data in a liquidation auction? Attorneys general across the country intervened. They warned, your genetic data cannot simply be sold without meaningful consent. The FTC issued guidelines. Some states passed emergency protections. But the legal framework was improvised, reactive, insufficient. Informed consent, medicine's most sacred principle, the idea that patients control what happens to their bodies and their data. But consent forms have become vehicles for data extraction, dense, technical. Designed to be signed, not read. Consent means nothing if the alternative is no treatment. You can decline to share your genetic data with researchers. But the hospital records it anyway. The insurance company uses it. And the consent form you signed waived rights you didn't know you had. Children's genetic data raises its own dimension of concern. Parents consent on behalf of children who have no voice. The data is stored for decades, long after childhood. When they turn 18, they inherit a digital biological profile they never chose to create. When they turn 18, they inherit a digital biological profile they never chose to create. A generation grew up treating genetic data as social currency. Share your ancestry, compare your traits, post your results. The normalization of biological disclosure happened in a single decade. What once required a subpoena now gets a heart emoji. What once required a subpoena now gets a heart emoji. Academic research and commercial interest became inseparable. Professors sat on company boards. Companies funded university labs. Papers were published with industry co-authors. The science was real, but so were the financial conflicts. Genetic counseling was built to humanize this data, to sit with a patient, explain the implications, navigate the fear, but direct-to-consumer tests skip the counselor entirely. You learn you have a cancer gene from a website, alone, at midnight. Some researchers went further, using genetic data to study political behavior, criminal propensity, intelligence. The science remains deeply contested, but the ambition is clear, and the history of this type of research is dark. The 20th century ran this experiment already. Eugenics, racial biology, genetic justifications for state violence, science in service of control, of elimination of hierarchy. We called it a lesson learned, but databases don't forget the lesson. GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, became law in 2008. It protects against discrimination in employment and health insurance. It does not cover life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care, and it cannot be enforced against data you've already given away. Life insurers in the United Kingdom were allowed to use genetic test results in underwriting until 2019, and even then, exceptions remained. In the United States, life and disability insurers still can use your genetic data. The law that protects you has more holes than it has walls. Inside this house, a complete biological profile of 4 people, built over years, given freely, stored permanently. They don't think of themselves as data points. But somewhere in a server rack none of them have ever seen, they already are. The architecture is complete. Hospitals, insurance companies, governments, tech companies, research institutions, all connected, all feeding from the same biological stream. Part 2 ends with a map. Part 3 will show you what the map is for. Biological surveillance was never just about medicine. From the beginning, intelligence agencies saw the strategic value. A person's genome is more uniquely identifying than a fingerprint, and it cannot be changed, stolen, or revoked. Intelligence services began treating genomic databases as intelligence assets, not just their own citizens, adversaries, allies, populations of interest. The goal: map the biological identity of any target. Find them, track them, understand their vulnerabilities from their DNA alone. In conflict zones, DNA collection became a tool of warfare. U.S. forces collected biometric data from hundreds of thousands of Afghans and Iraqis. Fingerprints, iris scans, DNA. When U.S. forces withdrew, that data was left behind, on devices in Taliban hands. The biometric data the U.S. collected to identify insurgents was now being used by insurgents. To identify collaborators, translators, U.S.-affiliated Afghans, the same database, different hands, catastrophic consequences. Biological surveillance became a death sentence. State-sponsored hackers began targeting genetic databases specifically. Not for financial fraud, not for identity theft, for the genomes, for the medical histories, for intelligence value that money cannot buy. Russia's military intelligence unit hacked biomedical databases, targeting genetic research, pharmaceutical trial data, COVID vaccine development. Western intelligence agencies documented the breaches. The biological Cold War had opened its second front. For decades, Western and Chinese scientists collaborated freely. Joint papers, shared labs, student exchanges. U.S. intelligence agencies now warn this collaboration enabled genetic intelligence collection. Scientific openness became a vulnerability. Dual-use research is biology's most dangerous category, developed to understand threats, capable of creating them. Every genomic database is a roadmap for targeting. Design a pathogen that affects one population and spares another. The Biological Weapons Convention banned biological weapons in 1972. It has no verification mechanism. Any signatory can develop prohibited weapons without meaningful detection. The database that maps human genetic diversity is a targeting manual, if someone chooses to use it that way. Genetics shows us how diseases affect populations differently. Essential for medicine, revolutionary for public health. But population-specific genetic vulnerabilities are also a military planning document. The same map that heals can be used to harm. In Xinjiang, China built a surveillance state targeting the Uyghur minority. Mass biometric collection, DNA profiling of an entire ethnic group. The world's largest ethno-specific genomic database, built through coercion. Human rights investigators called it the infrastructure of genocide. International law has been slow to address biological surveillance. No treaty governs genetic data at a global level. No court has yet prosecuted mass genomic collection as a human rights violation. The law is building its case. The database was built years ago. On dark web markets, genetic databases became commodities. Stolen from companies, extracted from breaches, sold in bulk. State actors, criminal syndicates, and private buyers all in the same marketplace. Your genome, available for purchase by anyone with cryptocurrency. Genetic data leaked into commercial targeting systems. Ancestry data linked to purchasing behavior. Health risk data linked to ad campaigns. Pharmaceutical ads targeted to people with inferred genetic vulnerabilities. Your biology became a marketing segment. Employment discrimination via genetic inference became a documented reality. Companies used third-party data services to screen candidates. Legal protections existed on paper. Enforcement was minimal. The discrimination happened in an algorithm, not a conversation. Financial services firms began exploring genetic risk as a pricing variable. Life expectancy, disease likelihood, cognitive trajectory. All potentially relevant to loan terms, mortgage pricing, credit access. The redlining of the 21st century, written in DNA. Political campaigns found uses for genetic ancestry data. Voter files cross-referenced with DNA ancestry databases. Target voters by inferred ethnicity. Customize messaging by genetic background. Predictive policing merged behavioral data with biological indicators. Genetic predisposition to mental illness. Family history of substance use. Used not as medical care but as pre-crime surveillance. The presumption of innocence met the certainty of an algorithm. The criminal justice system's DNA database reflects its broader inequities. Black Americans are overrepresented in DNA databases by a factor of 3, because arrest rates are disproportionate, and DNA collection follows arrests. The database encodes systemic bias in biological code. DNA exoneration freed over 375 wrongfully convicted Americans. The power of genetic truth liberating the innocent. But that same power has produced false matches, contaminated samples, tunnel vision. DNA evidence is not infallible, but juries treat it as if it is. DNA labs have produced contaminated evidence, fabricated results, botched analysis. People were imprisoned on faulty genetic testimony. The mystique of DNA evidence made it nearly impossible to challenge in court. Juries believed the science. The science was sometimes wrong. Genetic data accelerated drug development in real and meaningful ways. Precision oncology saves lives. Pharmacogenomics prevents deadly drug reactions. The science is genuinely revolutionary. But the infrastructure built to serve medicine is dual use by design. Defense contractors built the system's backbone. Palantir, Leidos, Psych, Buzalin. They integrated databases, built analysis tools, trained government agencies, private companies operating the infrastructure of national biological surveillance. The lobbying machine protected the industry. Campaign contributions, revolving door employment, advisory board appointments. The lawmakers who were supposed to regulate genetic surveillance were funded by the industry they regulated. The watchdog and the fox slept in the same house. Whistleblowers emerged inside the system. Genetic privacy violations documented, complaints filed, careers ended. Some cases reached the courts, most did not. The ones that did produce settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Companies under pressure deleted data, sometimes legally required to. But deletion is not destruction. Backups exist. Copies were shared before the delete order arrived. And data sold to a third party cannot be recalled. DNA collection entered schools, educational genealogy projects, science experiments, ancestry research assignments. Children, sometimes as young as 8, swabbing themselves for classroom activities. Teachers facilitating biological data collection without knowing what they were enabling. Professional sports entered the genetic era. Athletic performance prediction from DNA. Teams using genetic data to evaluate players before signing them. Your genome decided whether you were worth a contract. DNA testing entered immigration law. proving family relationships for asylum claims, verifying parentage for citizenship. Essential in some cases, coercive in others, the most vulnerable people required to prove themselves through their biology. Forensic genealogy also does extraordinary good, identifying victims of violence, reuniting families with the missing, naming the unnamed, giving the dead back their identities. The technology is not evil. The question has always been who controls it, how and for what. Artificial intelligence trained on genomic databases reached a new threshold. Not just predicting disease, predicting behavior, predicting thought patterns, correlating genetic variants with psychological profiles. The AI knows things about you that you don't know about yourself. People began to understand what had been built, not all at once, not from a single revelation, but case by case, breach by breach, lawsuit by lawsuit. The anger was slow to arrive, but when it came, it was large. States began to act. Texas, Montana, California, Montana. Texas, Montana, California, a patchwork of protection emerging. Better than nothing, not enough to stop the system already in motion. Legislation that arrives after the database is a footnote to the breach. Journalists documented what the systems obscured. ProPublica, the New York Times, MIT Technology Review, investigative reporting that connected the dots no single institution would connect. Journalism as the last immune system of a democratic body. Part 3 ends at the moment of maximum consequence. The system is built, the data is collected, the weapons are drawn. Now comes the question every generation must answer. Who do you trust with the most intimate data ever gathered? A reckoning was coming, a global awakening. Not from above, not from a single legislator or court, from millions of people who understood for the first time what had been taken, and who decided they wanted it back. They wanted control. Courts began to confront questions they had avoided for decades. Does the Fourth Amendment protect genetic data? Is it ours? Is your DNA a private communication or a public fact? The legal answer will determine the shape of freedom for generations. Europe moved first, leading the global charge. The European Court of Human Rights ruled genetic data a fundamental right. Storage of innocent persons' DNA without consent, a violation of privacy. A legal foundation finally, but one that stops at Europe's borders. A global framework for genetic privacy does not yet exist. Not yet. The UN has recognized the need. Negotiations have begun. But the countries with the largest databases resist binding constraints. International law moves on the timeline of international politics. The resistance was global, from London to Lagos. Not organized by a single leader, not funded by a single institution. Driven by millions of ordinary people who said, "My biology is not your property." The movement was decentralized, like the data itself. A reckoning was coming, a global awakening of the human spirit. They built their own data governance frameworks, controlling who could access their genetic data, teaching the biology, teaching the ethics, teaching the legal rights, and who intended to make different choices. They understood the stakes. Genetic medicine has transformed oncology, pediatric disease, rare conditions. Comprehensive federal legislation remained unfinished, as of this telling. Who understood that democracy's most important job is controlling what power can know? A community that decided together what it would consent to, but the principle was recognized at the highest level for the first time, and a civilization deciding for the first time that its most intimate data deserves a guardian worthy of it. The H3 Africa Initiative, the African Genomic Medicine Training Initiative. Privacy by design became a sellable feature, not just an afterthought. Data trusts began to emerge, a new model of stewardship. Global genomic surveillance saved lives in COVID-19. It was essential. The tension between those two goods is real and unresolved. Governance frameworks began to take shape, a collective effort, and who intended to make different choices, a future of responsibility. Teaching the biology, teaching the ethics, teaching the legal rights, education. The biological surveillance state was built in the dark. It ends here. A ruling that redrew the line between the state and the body. Children alive today because of what was built from this data. Genetic medicine has transformed oncology, pediatric disease, rare conditions. Education became a line of defense. Knowledge is power. Africa began building the infrastructure of genomic self-determination. The databases exist, the data has been collected, audited, science funded by the people it studies, returning its discoveries to them. Under regulatory pressure, legal threat, consumer backlash, clear language, they built their own data governance frameworks, a call to action. Your DNA is yours, not your government's, not a corporation's, sovereignty. But the principle was recognized, and at the highest level and for the first time, the vote. The databases exist, the data has been collected, secure it,